Hey, I will see. So I think we're live. Okay, so welcome everybody to the 8th edition of SEMFiloquium. And for those who don't know what SEMFiloquium is, it's just like a conversation in the style of a colloquia when we invite researchers, scientists, thinkers on many backgrounds to talk about what they do, how they think about science, about interdisciplinarity, about life, philosophy, many topics. And today is a special edition. We call it neurotransmissions because it's like a bit of a play of words because we have an invited speaker from the transmitter, which is like a resource online for all things of neuroscience and science, and the community around it. And yeah, so we want to talk about what happens in people's brains. We are brains thinking, but we are also scientists, researchers, thinkers, communicating. So that's why we went today, Francisco Rivera. I hope I said your name perfectly fine.
Yeah,
I know we share the same Latino background.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, he's a science editor in this transmitter place, and he also has a background in science. Actually, he's a neuroscientist that transitioned into scientific editing and writing. Yeah, I mean, that's what I found online, but I would like actually for you to introduce yourself. Um, what's your background, your origin? How did you reach from being a scientist, a person, until this current position? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sophia. I really, it's a great opportunity to chat with you.
Happy to have you.
Yeah, yeah. So currently, like, I'm one of the editors at the Transmitter, and the Transmitter is, like you mentioned, a neuroscience news and perspective site where we cover neuroscience by like two different ways. Like, one, we have like the news where we have like science journalists write about new research in neuroscience, write about the scientists doing the research, things around neuroscience research, like funding changes and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. So, like, all things, all aspects on the news side. And then we also have a section where we cover perspective from neuroscientists, right? So this is neuroscientists writing for our site on particular topics or issues that are important and pressing or controversial in the field. And that's where I work at. So, like, I am the editor and the perspective, one of the editors of the perspective section. And I really, they just like talk to neuroscientists about sort of like what are the things that are like most important to them, or like controversies like scientifically, or maybe like what are the things that the field needs to do to progress towards the future. Those are the type of things I like talk to neuroscientists about, like at conferences and stuff, and then like ultimately have them like contribute to the site. So we're essentially like a magazine, right? Different from like a scientific journal, right? But because we all have a background in neuroscience, we have the ability to cover all these things in a way that is like very rigorous, right? And it doesn't like sort of like gloss over the details or rigor of the science.
Okay, that's
Um,
yes.
so
Yeah.
yeah,
So
go ahead.
please continue. I don't know.
Yeah. Personally, like I was a scientist before, and like I grew up in Puerto Rico. I got my bachelor's and master's degree in Puerto Rico, and then I moved to the U.S. here to at a school in New York to do like a PhD in neuroscience. And around like year four, like the pandemic hit. And I
Oh
really
yeah.
like want like reevaluated like sort of like what I wanted to
A
do in
lot of
life.
people
And
in the science community did that too. I
exactly,
wrote
yeah, I
my
know.
thesis during the pandemic. Oh my god, it was like really, really extreme.
So
Yeah.
but that's really cool because I did like I was further back, right?
Yeah.
So like I was in a place where the pandemic hit and my project was in a really bad place.
Oh
Like
yeah.
experiments weren't working, you know.
And you come from a health background. Oh, I think we have technical issues. Oh. Sorry, you got completely frozen for like two
Oh,
seconds.
oh, sorry.
Maybe
Oh,
the pandemic start to
yeah, the pandemic reached out again.
we have a
Uh,
bit of like a we're in panic mode right now.
yeah.
Because
um,
you also come from a
uh,
health background, right? So like
yes.
you have a different perspective than a normal scientist on this, right? Yeah.
Yes,
Hmm.
yes, exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah. So during that time, like
Hmm.
my project was in a really bad place. And like I essentially really thought about like what I wanted to do in my life, and separately as a just like a person, I always love like magazine writing and like reading, and just like I enjoyed a lot of like media, like science writing, or like National Geographic, stuff like that. So I was like, like let me try to do something that I just like I enjoy and I want to do, just to find like a little bit of love back in science. So I started like a newsletter at my school during the pandemic, about like the researchers that were like studying COVID, and the volunteering efforts from like students at the school like during the pandemic. And nobody read the newsletter, nobody cared about it at all. But it was kind of like my first like foray into like writing about science. And I was like, oh, okay, like I like this, and this like kind of like gives me like the passion that I have for science back again. So I left the PhD program and pursued like a career in like science communication, science journalism.
That's very interesting
Uh,
because like I think um, like a standard career path of a scientist, like communicating, it's more like an afterthought that like a, I mean, at least from the general audience, right? So because like either we think, okay, it's only the people who are interested in the details of our research are only going to read these, so we're not going to reach many people, or they really think I just want to focus on what I'm doing, and the rest of the world exists beyond my realm. So it's very easy to like sink yourself into your area of research and look forward. But I think it's like so important, right? So relevant that the community that sustain alive, that is doing the research, also gets a little hint of what science is. So I think that what you're doing is so interesting. Actually, I mean, I have a question regarding to this. Like, I mean, before like joining the transmitter, like you were, pursuing doing this communication, and you just said like nobody read it, but
yeah.
people are interested, like how do you reach, the people who are interested? How do you reach the community? How do you create value while communicating science?
Yeah, I think that's a challenge that like a lot of people like wonder, right? And I think like you can, as a scientist, you can be a communicator of science without making it your entire career, right? Obviously, because you can still like stay like doing the science. But I think it's all about knowing your the audience that you want to reach out to, right? And then just like trying like a lot of like different things, like in your like spare time. So that's something that I did, like that newsletter I did because I wanted to like communicate to like the people that were doing other types of research, for example, like neuroscience research, what the researchers in the immunology department studying COVID were doing. So like I thought, oh, like it's something that I would be interested in. Maybe like the rest of the department like would be interested in too. And even though like that like didn't like work out because like it just like didn't have like a lot of traction, it still was like useful for me to like develop that skill like to write. So like I think like one of the things that there's like so many ways to communicate science through like writing like a Substack, or for example like doing like videos on like Instagram or like LinkedIn or like TikTok and stuff. I think it's all about sort of like, if you are interested in communicating like science, first like really like know like what you want to talk about first, and then like communicate like the passion in a way that is like accessible to your audience, but that will take time. Like I started out sort of like writing and communicating about science to like a specific audience, and it like I look at those like newsletters now and I'm like, oh, those are bad, those are not good.
Well,
Like those
you
are
had a very
like
scientific approach doing this in a way, right? Because you say like, okay, I did something, but I'm trying to improve it in the process of making it, right? So it's
yes.
it's something that can be applied to many topics, but in particular, the scientific method, like tends you to create experiments, and in a way, what you were doing before was an experiment, and it's always a continuous improvement, right?
Hmm.
So I'm
Yes,
I'm
exactly.
wondering. You mentioned before that the transmitter, which you already talk a little bit of what it is, but it's mostly built with scientists, right? So most of the people working there are scientists. Do you have
Yes,
also
absolutely.
journalists, other roles within the journal, or how would you
Yeah,
call it?
yeah.
The transmitter, a journal, a resource, a
Like a
magazine.
magazine.
Okay,
A
okay.
magazine. That's the best way to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
Like other science, one scientist called us like the newspaper of neuroscience, and I really love that description. Because it's like things that are timely, right? Like things that are like current date paper. We're not covering papers that came out 4 months ago. We're covering papers that came out like this week or like the week before. Like it's important for us to like communicate to the community that like we're up to date on like the latest and greatest like research, right? And yeah, like most of us here, I think like most of us have a background in neuroscience. Like for example, out of our writers right now, we have 3 staff writers. 2 of them did their neuroscience PhD and like are finished, completed their PhD and defended their thesis, and then transitioned into science journalism. Another writer, she did a neuroscience undergrad degree and then did a journalism master's degree.
Okay, okay. That's very interesting.
So like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and like for myself, like I did a master's, like was working in neuroscience and doing a PhD, didn't finish it, but did like neuroscience for like research for about like 7 or 8 years, and then sort of transition into like science communication and writing, kind of like on my own experience, not with like a formal like program or like formal training, right? So a lot of us here like because of we have that background, it allows us to like get into like the topics in a way that is like very very like much more deeper than like other places,
So
right?
do you think
So
that's the
so
main difference between scientists doing journalism than journalists doing science? What do you think are the difference?
yeah, absolutely. So I think that like when you're a scientist who transitions into doing journalism, you have to learn like the journalism parts of it, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, like I didn't know how to conduct an interview, I didn't know how to like structure like an essay or like a news story, I didn't know the editorial process of like taking a piece from the first draft, going through 3, 4, 7 drafts, like making it like simpler and direct, and not and only like communicating the essential information in a piece. Whereas like in my previous science writing as a scientist, there was so much information I would like put into a paper that for a news article or an opinion essay, you don't need all that information. So I needed to learn, like, okay, your main purpose is your audience, and only need to communicate what is essential for them, right? So you need to be concise. So all those aspects of journalism I learned on the fly, right?
Yeah, and I
On the
have,
other hand,
yeah, sorry, I have
yeah,
two questions relating to that, but maybe
yeah,
maybe you finish what you were thinking, and I will take note of those
yeah.
comments. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. When the scientists who like are like journalists who like have to learn about the science, that is a different experience that like I don't know about, but I have heard that it just like takes a lot of time for them to sort of gain their knowledge base to cover a topic in a way that is like really like educated, right? So but they know the journalism aspects of it better than I do, so like they like know how to structure an interview better than I do, but like for example like the science, that might take them like a little bit like longer, but ultimately I think this it just kind of shows that getting to a career in science communication and science journalism is not linear. There's no one way to do it, right? Because we all, like here at the Transmitter and at other publications that I read and admire, like you will hear so many different stories from people who like got to science communications, got to science journalism in a very different way. So there is really no one way to sort of like do this career.
Okay. Yeah, and it's very interesting because I have two things related to this. Is, I mean, in a way, you did the transition, although you always liked this part of scientific communication, right? But after learning all of these, journalism aspects of communicating science, did it change a little bit your perspective of what you were doing before, or your role as a scientist?
Yeah, I think it changed how I like if I were able to talk to myself like back then, I'd be like, hey, like really try to think about what you're working on. How would you communicate it to a person that's like not interested in it, like and like try to be like more interdisciplinary, which like I think that like it's something that like as scientists like we don't appreciate, and like we're just like so focused on our work, that like
Here at
we
SEMF, we definitely do appreciate
of
interdisciplinarity.
course,
It's
yes,
in the
yeah.
name. Yeah.
Absolutely. But yeah, I do think that like in PhD programs, like we're you're so focused on your work that you like sometimes like miss like putting it in a broader context, So like I do look back at that time and think like, oh, like I should have when I was like a PhD, like should have gone to a cognitive neuroscience talk because I was a molecular neuroscientist, right? So like that was I was like very focused on molecular neuroscience. So talks about like computational neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience, they weren't that interesting to me. But now that I think about it, I'm like, oh, that I should have gone to those talks because it would have like helped me just like think about my project in like a broader conceptual, like place, right? So it made me think of like doing what I do now, it just made me think about like like there would have been spaces for me to be like a little bit more broader in my interest, which like now I have to be because like now like I work with a scientist on a piece about computational neuroscience, then another one about like molecular neuroscience, then another one about science policy, So in my role, I have to learn just enough about so many different things to be able to like edit and support a scientist writing a piece in a way that I'm like giving them like good edits to like improve the piece. But in order for me to do that, I need to know a lot about multiple aspects of neuroscience and usually do it in a very short time. I really like that aspect of my
Maybe you
job that
even
I
read
can.
more papers than you used to do when you were working on neuroscience, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, we hear that all the time. Like the writers and editors hear that like when we talk to scientists, neuroscientists, they're like, you have more time to read papers than I do as a practicing neuroscientist, and like it's a very cool thing to do. But it also kind of like speaks to the fact that like when you're practicing the actual science, it's like you really do need to set aside time to read papers and stay up to date in the field. And
Yeah.
and unfortunately, because scientists are so busy, sometimes they don't have the chance to do that. So it actually like emphasizes that like people should be, even though like they're so busy, should be reading a little bit more papers because it keeps you like up to date on
In
the
a
field.
way,
And
it's a
and I've
time
I've heard.
management issue, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Oh,
it's very
absolutely.
hard.
I
Yeah.
know. Yeah, I know that like the scientists are so busy, that like sometimes that like falls by the wayside. But and like everybody like wishes they could just like be like more up to date on like the latest papers. So and that's like selfishly, that's I think like where we come in and we like help people, be like, hey, like maybe here's this paper that you might have not read, this is why this is interesting, so that's kind of like one of the aspects that we want to support the neuroscience
That's
community.
definitely something that many scientists may not think about this role and maybe so relevant, right? To have somebody on top of things, like the
Mhm.
state of the art, like, but from an outside perspective, because you now have this editorial perspective, which brings me to the other question that I had in mind, because it's like, um, you mentioned, right, that you have to extract the parts that can be communicated or are interesting for the broader audience, right? So what aspects of the science, not just the science itself, but the scientific culture, become more
Mhm.
visible when you have this editorial perspective on science?
Mhm. That's an interesting question. I think that it the way that I look at it is just like how media and like magazines like have looked at it for like a long time, and like it's that like people are inundated with information, and like there's like so many
Oof.
like I think of the Transmitter as, like a magazine competing not only with other magazines, but also competing with like TikTok and like Twitter and like, and like so many like distractions, or like a podcast, that like you really do need to sort of like focus on like what are like the key important takeaways from like a paper or like an opinion piece, like, and I think like the people are really into, and what we see on our audience is that people are really into like, for example, major takeaways and implications of a particular paper,
Mm-hmm.
but also like the process. How did you get there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how did they like what was behind sort of like that like initial insight into the research, and like getting multiple perspectives from a lot of scientists on like why a particular paper is important, or why a particular perspective is important.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of people are like interested in sort of the science, but also like the people as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's an aspect that I also really like. I think that's the important part. Like when you also take the human aspect of it, it becomes a community, And I mean, I'm going to be a bit off topic this because like 2 years ago, I I took a mini course of communication in general and marketing and stuff like that, and they were talking about the big Fs, like big five, the five Fs of communication, and I don't remember. I mean, fame was one of them, but the first one, it's fear. When
Mm-hmm.
when you communicate, the most effective way of communicating is through fear, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that's. I mean, it's definitely not what you were thinking about when you were talking
Right.
about it, right? But apparently, it's a tool, that people use, in order to
Mm-hmm.
communicate. So, but how? I mean, I think it's a little bit unethical to trigger something.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, neuroscientists can probably model it very well, how that
Mm-hmm.
how fear works on the brain or in all our being, Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but how can we be effective, in communication, in something like what you're doing, in an ethical way, but also effective? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think like yeah, fear wouldn't be the one I would choose. Like I think
That's what
that
they
like
said, and apparently it's true because you go to the news, and half of them are
yeah.
like I don't know, pandemics, deaths, car crashes and things like that, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I think that like what works for us is like um communicating like science in a way that gets at the points of real like intrigue and like controversy, and not like controversy like in a way where like it's like bad, but like places where the science is really at odds with each other, and it's like, okay, like there's this particular topic that neuroscience is like really interested in figuring out. Let's see like what are the different perspectives or the different types of research that are like trying to get at this question, and like what are the major questions about a particular topic. So like the things that I think about when I work with neuroscientists in their essays is like, okay, like you have like, for example, like they come a scientist comes with an idea to me, right? Like, oh, I want to write about this topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this like new perspective that I have for metabolism in the brain, for example.
Okay.
And they tell me their perspective, and one of the things I ask them is like, okay, like if somebody were to disagree with you, what is the opposite perspective of this
Mm-hmm.
idea, because I do want to know like there's no idea within neuroscience and science in general that is like, universal, right? So like, are we talking about a thing where there's like a lot of consensus on, or are we talking about a thing where like the
Controversial,
neuroscience
right?
community,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there, and but not, there's like healthy scientific discussion about,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that is one of the things that like we always like try to do, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
things that like really to like drive like scientific discovery, and like scientific discovery is, you know, like driven by like research that like it might be like on separate sides, but like we need to reconcile like how these two like separate findings like work with each other, right, for a better understanding of the brain. So I think it's like what I think like works for us and like could work for other people is like really like looking for like these points, these inflection points in a particular field where like the field is like there's a really hot topic of debate within the scientist that doesn't get to, you know, like, you know, toxic, right, that like there is a very accessible way and collegial and scientifically appropriate way to disagree with colleagues, you know, like, and we try to like capture that in some of the things that we cover.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about something that I think it's very relevant, and I may ask for your take on it. Because you mentioned something very crucial, right? Like there needs to be a conflict or a question that drives, you know, a look for an answer, or at least for more questions within that same topic, right? But there's always the human component, which is the people deciding, you know, pursuing that particular topic. So my question in a way is like, how do we know, you know, how much are we biasing ourselves towards a particular topic that is worth pursuing? How much are we missing? How much do we don't know that we don't know? You know, how do you think from your, you know, big editorial, you know, big view of science, are we dealing with this, you know, as humans, being scientists, trying to pursue knowledge, but at the same time not necessarily being the perfect at deciding what to do from research, right?
I think like there is like definitely like bias toward like a particular like area in the field, you know, maybe because like, oh, so many people have published in this area, so let me like study that because like that will like get me to like publish more, you know,
Or more citations or things like that. Yeah.
exactly. And there's definitely like trends in the field too, you know, like oh, like this is like becoming this area of neuroscience is becoming popular, and therefore I should like continue to pursue it as well, you know. I think it takes one of the things that I was like talking about earlier, the things that I wish I would have done when I was at a PhD program is trying to be as interdisciplinary as possible and being open to other areas of the field and other perspectives that you might not be open to like in your particular like area. Like one of the things that I'm very lucky that I do that I get to do is go to a lot of conferences like in part of my role, and I really want to make sure that I am like going to very different sort of like sessions to make sure that I don't become like stagnant, you know, in like what I am like thinking about or covering, you know, like it really takes like reading a lot, you know, like reading a lot of different things, but also like seeing like a lot of science and a lot of folks like working on very different things, not to become like insular in like what your interests are, you know, and like that is something that I think like can combat these like biases and sort of like these like popularity trends. Like if you make sure that like you're a theoretical neuroscientist, whatever, right? Like for example, like make sure that you're like seeing perspectives outside of your field, because like that like will really help you sort of like put your work into like a broader context and like potentially maybe like break you out of some like potential biases, you know?
Yeah, it's a good point. Thank you. And also brings me to something I think you particularly like, because you see so many ways, you know, of creating science, but also ways of communicating science. And you said you were passionate about like scientific writing in general, and apparently there are many ways in which scientists write. And I'm very curious to hear it because, like, I mean, I am a scientist too, you know, like, and I'm used to read like papers in my field, but apparently there are many ways to communicate within the community, I think, and also outside it. And I'm wondering, I'm very curious, what do you mean when the science write styles can be different from field, from people, from what? Yeah.
Yeah, I think like your writings are like there are very many like different types of like science writing, right? Like you have like the traditional like journal writing, right, which is like we all know, and it's like very like descriptive, and it like depends a lot on like focusing on the results and sort of like explaining like the methods and stuff like that. And there is like opinion writing, for example, like which like we do at the transmitter, and a lot of that like has like to have like a little bit more voice to it and a little bit like more like personality like to your like type of writing, and it also like really like focuses on like not using like passive voice, like one of like for
Yes.
example like in a paper you would you'd say like, oh, like researchers have found or something, like oh, like in the past like researchers have found X, like in like opinion writing, for example, the researchers found X, like be very direct about like what they actually like found, so that's one type of writing. There's like scientific writing that pertains to like communicating to the press, so like press releases that come out from like new research that an institute does, and like you want to like get it out to media outlets. There's you can write like press releases that are like very like short summaries of your work and why it matters, and like we get those a lot, like institutions like reaching out to us saying, hey, this is the new work that this lab did on our institution, here's like a short summary about it, so you like know like the context of it in case you're like interested in like covering it. So that's the one type of scientific writing. There's a whole separate world of scientific writing that is more related to like pharma and commercial writing. So for example, like so when I left my PhD program, I actually started working at a science communication agency, and which is like a company that works to develop content and writing for like pharmaceutical companies. And like in that case, you're writing I was writing content for experts. So for example, like a new like in the agency, we had clients like different pharmaceutical companies, and let's say there was like a new drug that came out, and for the drug to like go to like the doctors, and then to start using it, we would need to write sort of like summaries about like the mechanism of action of the drug and what is like the efficiency of the drug, and how to like prescribe it. So that information like was written in like little brochures that like pharmaceutical companies like send out to like the physicians, and like, hey, like these are like the important details that you need to know about this new medication. So I learned how to do that, and it wasn't like a super like exciting job, but it taught me to write in a different way, right? It taught me to write like it's very different when you write to a physician versus like when you write to a scientist versus when you write to the lay public.
You have to know your
So like
audience.
exactly, like I think that's like the most
It's more than
important
the
point,
field, but rather the objective that you have when you write something, right?
Exactly.
And I think
Yes.
I think there's an important topic, because like okay, like most of the papers that I work are based like of being as precise, as rigorous as possible, right? But when you communicate towards a non-technical audience, right, the message has to be there and has to gain visibility, but at the same time, how do you gain that visibility using non-technical words and preserve the truth of the message
Yeah.
behind, of the work behind it? How do you do that?
It's hard. It's hard. It's something that like like I had to learn like over years, and and I would argue that I'm still like learning even like in my like current role. I think it is about you finding the spaces where you need to give more information and the spaces where like less information is better. For example, like if you're in like a neuroscience, you're talking about like a result that came from like an optogenetics experiment. Like I know what optogenetics is because like I am a scientist, like, but that is very like important for you to communicate to like an audience like that like doesn't know what it is, right? So it's as simple to say like, you know, like we conducted these experiments via optogenetics, which is a technique that does X, Y, and Z, and we found that, and then you like go into the results, you know. So like finding like a very like concise way to communicate like what a technique does, you know, like, or what a like a statistical analysis is a very very like important thing to do. And then on the other end, like there might be like you might do like 7, 10, 12 experiments in a paper. It's really hard, like for example, like in a press release or like in a layperson summary, to communicate the result of every single
And
experiment.
sometimes you work so hard, you want in a topic 80% of your time, and it's only one line or even not there, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It really you have to sort of like learn to let go, you know, and like
Ooh,
understand that like
uh,
you're
it's
more
psychology
efficient.
too here.
Yeah. You are more efficient communicating your science like if you're like writing a layperson summary, or like if you're like for example if you have like a blog, like a personal blog where you write about like the science that you're doing, and like have it on Substack or like LinkedIn or whatever, like you are more efficient being concise and writing about like, hey, you know, like these are like the major implications of this paper, and have it be like 2 or 3 sentences over trying to cram in so much information into like a post or you know, a blog or like some sort, you know, like it really and I understand it because I was a scientist too. I wanted people to know what every single experiment meant, you know, like because
Yeah.
like you work so hard on it. But I think like being concise is so important, and like being concise means like different things to different people, you know,
Yeah.
it's really important for you to like take like whatever like you want to like take away from your paper, like being able to communicate it in 2 or 3 sentences, which seems like such a daunting task, right? But it's something that is possible just with like practice and, you know, and a
Yeah.
little experience and care.
And I
Yeah.
see it a bit different because like I do have a lot of experience in science communication and outreach, you know, which is different in a way to what you're doing because like um, it's always focused on an audience as far away as possible as where you are, and you're trying to use a lot of analogies in a way. So like the rigor or the precision of what you're doing, it may get lost, but the message of what you want to convey, like, you know, like what drove you to do this in particular, or what was the path that took you to that, you know, rather than like what I did, you know, it's like a different kind of, you know, and sometimes it's very hard because you have to find the right analogies, and I mean, analogies are by definition not exactly precise, right? So you may lose a little bit of a scientific rigor on that. But in the kind of journalism that you guys are doing there, I mean, you have to preserve, you know, but that's the core, you know, have to preserve the science message rather than just the motivation behind it, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you make a really good point that you know, because differencing outreach from journalism and like what we do here, like because outreach is trying to get a message about like science to like a group of people that like might not like be interested in science, and you just like want to grow it, right? So and I know that there's like at institutions they do like scientific outreach for like, you know, like students in high schools
Yep.
or like undergrads and stuff like that. And how you communicate there is so much more different than what you would communicate in like a place like us, which
Yep.
we are like, which is science journalism. And in outreach, you are allowed to be like, hey, look at how cool science is. This is amazing. This is really cool. Like in science journalism, you have to like be really rigorous about the facts, right? And not to say that like you don't write in a way that is exciting, but like it is a writing in a way that like puts the content in context, and it's not like overly enthusiastic or overly excited about like whatever you're like reporting on, because you have to maintain a level of
Yep.
professionalism within journalism. So like outreach and advocacy and journalism, I feel like a lot of like
Advocacy is
scientists,
very important. It touches politics too, something we don't talk too
yes,
much in science, right?
right. But I think that like people conflate the two, right?
Yep.
And they're very different things, and they are targeted to very different groups of people. So I think it's important to like make those distinctions, because you are, when you do outreach and advocacy, you are communicating science. You're not doing journalism, and that's fine. But
Yeah.
that's different. And when you're doing journalism, it might eventually become some type of advocacy, but that's not the goal of
Exactly.
journalism, you
Yeah.
know? So that those, I did want to like make sure that those things are like distinct.
And I mean, and you, it's always about the people we communicate, you know. And talking about people, I know there's something that you really, really like to do within the transmitter, which is something that I read a little bit about. Is this paper changed my life, which I
Yeah.
found it super cool because, like, literally the human perspective of people, scientists reading science in a way, right, and discovering. Like being touched, you know, by other people's processes, thoughts, and discoveries, right? So can you please
Mm.
tell us a little bit more from your perspective what you were doing there?
Yeah, so this paper changed my life is a series that I love very, very much. It's a series where, like you said, like a neuroscientist talks about one paper that was very important to them. And the reason why that is cool is because usually when you look at series like these, it's like, oh, this scientist is going to talk about a really important paper in neuroscience that really changed the field or whatever. And that's great, because like, you know, like there are papers that are so important for the field that they need the recognition, right? Like obviously, and like it's important to, if it's a groundbreaking paper and change the field entirely, it's important to put that context. But very rarely do you get to hear a scientist say, no, this is why I do what I do now, because of this paper and this research. And the way that we thought about it was that like we wanted to be like the same way that you have your favorite movie, the way same that you have your favorite like band, you know, or like TV show. We wanted the scientists to talk in those terms about a paper, you know,
It's like the
and
favorite artist of your favorite artist in a way, right?
that
Yeah.
is exactly what it is.
I
Yes, that
got
is
it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the cool thing about it is that like you ask any scientist about like, hey, like what is like the one, you know, do you have like a favorite like paper or like a favorite type of research? And usually they know it immediately. Usually they know like, oh yeah, it was this paper. Like I have one, like it was like a paper that I read when I was in doing my master's degree. It was Fred Gage's paper on identifying that adult neurogenesis happens in humans, which is something that like I had heard for so long
Oh,
that like
yeah, yeah. They always
neuro
talk your adult brain is completely stuck in the way it is.
exactly
You know, it's about
exactly
neuroplasticity, right?
in that paper, like I learned that, oh no, like there's neuroscientists that are figuring out that like neurogenesis might still be happening in like the, you know, human hippocampus. That's crazy. Like I've been told for so long that that doesn't happen, you know. So that was my paper. And like I know, like whenever I talk to neuroscientists about the series, they're immediately like, that's so cool, like I have my paper, you know. And I really, what we really try to do in the series is like to have them put us where they were, you know. Where were you when you first read the paper? What year were you in, like what were you studying back then, you know? And how did this paper change your assumptions of how you think, how you thought about neuroscience, and like to really like map out, this is who I was, and these were my scientific interests before this paper. This is how it changed it, and this is how it influenced my career from then on. It's a really cool thing to do. And honestly, like another thing that's really cool about the paper is that the series is that it is about the science, but also in those articles, there are times where the scientist says, I actually talked to the person who published the paper about this paper, and like they gave me great advice, or like one of them, Ismail Abdusabur, who's a neuroscientist at the University of Columbia, he talked about how he talked to David Anderson, the person who published the paper that he selected for the series. He talked to him at a conference, and Ishmael said that he was so scared to talk to him at a conference, and that David Anderson interacted with him and like gave him like great advice on his project. And Ishmael, in the piece, he says that that interaction propelled me for the rest of my career.
Wow.
And now Ishmael, like when students come up to him at conferences, he remembers how David treated him so well when like he was like a young scientist, and he's like, I always give people 5 minutes of time to talk about their science because I know how valuable that can
The
be.
human factor.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a cool idea. How do you guys got inspired to create it?
So I love like media that covers like movies and TVs and like pop culture, right? And I kind of like took this idea from other types of media that talk about movies and TV. So it's like I love when musicians talk about other musicians, and
That's why
musicians
I
talk
said
about.
it. We didn't prepare this.
So it essentially is that it like came from like me like reading like interviews with like musicians, and them like talking about how they were inspired by like another musician. So we kind of like developed. We wanted to have a series where like scientists were talking about other papers, so other people's work. And originally, we were gonna do something along the lines of like having scientists write about a seminal paper, like a really important paper for the field. But then we thought about like, oh, like, let's just let them write about what they want to write about, like, and that's and ultimately, when it comes to like opinion pieces, an opinion writing or perspective writing, um, whenever your writer is like whatever makes them passionate, that will usually lead to a better result than you assigning something. Instead of you saying like in this case, which is like the neuroscientist, like we could have gone to them and be like, hey, could you tell us about this paper in particular? And it would have been fine, but I don't think it would have had the same impact. When they get to choose it and they're like, oh, I can tell you 100 things about why this paper is cool. That like breeds like a better like result, and we've seen it, But the idea came kind of from that, from like me like listening to musicians talk about other musicians'
Honestly,
work.
it's,
Yeah.
it's just so cool because I think we lost sometimes the emotional component, of like scientific life. I mean, we are humans, and to choose science as a life path is not a necessarily easy choice. In a way, you have the privilege, to choose something that you're passionate about, but it becomes, very hard, because many aspects of it are not necessarily the ones that make you passionate about the science, right? And you need, as a human, to have this emotional connection and this passion to be revived, every day to motivate you to do a better science, as you were saying. So I think it's a really good way, to showcase that to the people, because sometimes the science is disentangled from the scientists, and scientists are humans, like politicians, like bankers, every person, they have their human component within that.
Absolutely. I think it's something that like we do very well. That like for example, like we write profiles about neuroscientists, like yes, we do want to talk about the science, but also we do want to talk about the people, like because like the like for our audience that is like mostly neuroscientists, like these are their colleagues. They like live with them, they're like like lives are built around their science, right? So like we do, I feel like we do have a good balance of like covering the science in a rigorous way, but also like focusing on other aspects that are surrounding the science and like the people as well, and how like those things intersect. So it's something that we really think about quite a lot.
And I imagine that a big chunk of your community your users are probably early career researchers, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I'm
Yeah,
wondering because I saw you're working on also something called the transmitter launch,
yeah.
and you talk with them, right? With the early career researchers.
Yes, so the Transmitter Launch is a newsletter that is targeted to early career researchers, and it comes out once a month, and it really has like articles that are about early career issues. You know, like for example, we have a series on neuroeducation, and we have neuroscientists writing about how we need to think about changing training in neuroscience moving forward over the next, like years. We have a series called Frame Shift, where it's about neuroscientists who did their training in neuroscience but transitioned into a different career path. For example, like in that series, we have it's a Q&A series where we talk to like a neuroscientist who founded a communication agency, a neuroscientist who started their own biotech, a neuroscientist that like did criminal law, like a criminal law PhD, like afterwards, and like now works in like philanthropy. So those are things that like early career researchers like are really thinking about, like, hey, like what am I going to do with my career, like we have like articles about that, and then we also want to highlight new labs. So we have in the newsletter, there are Q&As with people that just started the new labs in the past 1 or 2 years. And we really ask them about their like lab philosophy, like what are they going to do to like foster a community in their lab, and also like what is the best advice that they got from a colleague, about like starting your new lab. So we have that in the newsletter, and then we also have like a list of like job opportunities. Like, oh, like, hey, like this lab needs 2 postdocs, or like this lab is hiring a technician, So it's a newsletter that has like a little bit of everything, and like it's things that are like useful for early career researchers, and like in the articles we like try to cover the topics that they care about, but it is also a place to like highlight the work of early career researchers as well. So that's kind of my focus. And when I go to conferences, or when I visit institutes like neuroscience departments in the US, or like in Europe or around the world, like I always try to like meet with early career researchers to say like, hey, like what do you want to see on this, like what should we be covering, and
Of course.
and I think that really like helps me, be in tune with like what I should be doing, right? Like if I hear from a lot of like early career researchers, hey, you guys should like have a series on, how to like figure out like a technique in neuroscience or whatever. Then I'm like, okay, well, like the audience wants it, right? So like I need to find a way to like, deliver for them in some way,
Yeah, and you start to touch something that I think is very interesting because, like, I mean, neuroscience in particular, as you say, it can lead to many careers, and also people bring people from many different, things because it touches, the brain, behavior, cognition, mental health, neurodiversity, artificial intelligence, consciousness. So it's like, I mean, integrating all of these things can be very challenging in terms of the communication. How do you? I mean, it also creates a very unique way of communicating it. How do you merge? How do you converge all of these topics?
Yeah, it's sometimes it's hard, like it's really hard to like decide on the day-to-day basis like what to do or like what to cover. I think it really is just being in touch with the community, and being in touch with the neuroscience community. Like there's like so many aspects of it, and like it can get overwhelming, like sometimes I just feel like, oh, like it's too much to cover, like we can't do all aspects of neuroscience.
Yeah.
But we're trying as best as we can, right? And I think like when I go to a conference, and when I like go visit like labs and go to institutes, like I have to be so focused, to like make sure that what we are doing on the magazine reflects what I'm seeing out in the scientific world, right? You know, because that alignment tells me that okay, like we are actually communicating, like we are actually reflecting what is happening the day to day on the day-to-day basis, like in neuroscience labs around the world, you know. And we listen a lot. Anytime we like talk to folks, we're like personally, like I'm always asking like, hey, like what did you like that we've done? What haven't you liked? You know, what do you think we should do more of? You know, it's that feedback and talking to like our community like drives us, you know. But there are so many like aspects of neuroscience and stuff that, you know, we're not covering everything, you know, like in the same way, you know. We still need to continue to get better to make sure that we're covering as many aspects of neuroscience as we can, because we want to give that type of diversity in topics to our audience.
And I get it, but I want to ask now your personal perspective to spill the tea, maybe, like especially because you come from the scientific background. So maybe you have an idea of which neuroscience topics are most vulnerable to either hype or oversimplification. You know?
Well, okay. Well, I will say like one of the things that we do here is that we kind of all have our different types of expertise, right? So like I am like much more of a molecular neuroscientist, so like those are the types of things that I like gravitate towards, right? But like I cover like neuroscience metabolism, like brain energetics and metabolism, but also neuroimmunology. Those are the areas that I like focus on. Other of my colleagues like focus on like computational neuroscience, the intersection of neuroscience and AI, right? Like, and I think there's like a lot of aspects of neuroscience that are like sort of like controversial or like vulnerable or whatever. Like I think like the conversation between like the interaction with neuroscience and AI is a conversation that is like happening, you know, every day, and like how to integrate those two things in the proper way. And we do a lot of like work covering that. And there's one particular series that I would want to highlight. Tim Reckwart's Bench to Bot series. He really does a good way analysis on like how to properly integrate AI into like the daily workings of science, right? Like, so he has like a lot of really like interesting perspectives on that. I think like you know, the conversation about psychedelics can like get so like out of control, right? Like in a place that doesn't in you know communication mediums that don't cover it in the way that like has the appropriate measure to it. And I think like if I could say like in other places, right? I think like those are the two things that like are most prone to like hyperbole, right? And it's really important for you to like go to outlets like us, but like other outlets, like they do like good coverage on like science topics to like when it comes to the psychedelics question or like neuroscience and AI, make sure that like it's you're reading about it from a place that is that really takes into account like the context and the caveats of these two topics, because those, I feel like those are like very much like what like the two topics in neuroscience that get like the most hype or the most like kind of like not measured coverage, right? Like it can, in some places they can just like overblow sort of like the implications
They
of
play
a
with
particular
the fear of the unknown.
yeah, exactly. You know, and but there are a lot of places that do it like very well, you know. So like it just like I think
But the
we live in
temptation
a
is there, I can just imagine, you
yeah.
know, because you also need to make money in a way, right? You live in a world when you have to do that to survive, right?
Absolutely, yeah. But I think like there is like
Mm-hmm.
so much information out there. Obviously, there are places that like cover science very, very well.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, I'll say selfishly, the Transmitter covers neuroscience very well. But like there are other places that do really great
Mm-hmm.
scientific like journalism and writing
Mm-hmm.
work.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing is like the topics that people know about, yeah, that are either oversimplified or hyped, as you described, right? But there's a particular topic of science in general that I think people don't really get, and I think in a way it's the problem of journalism as a broad thing, which is the topic
Mhm,
of uncertainty.
mhm,
Because I have heard so many times, I don't know if I should trust a scientist because they change their mind all the time. That's a
mhm,
thing I have heard. And it's the thing that people are used to see, like this produces this creates that, this comes from this, but it's a continuous process, and we have to change our mind if we receive enough evidence that has to make us change our minds. But that's something that it's very hard to entail, I think, to the general audience because they don't train too much onto this. So
mhm.
what do you think you in the journalism perspective are doing? How can we make this very crucial part of science more acknowledged outside of the community? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's about um, communicating in communicating how the practice of science actually works, and the fact that like changing your mind based off of new information is not a like fault, it's like
Mm-hmm.
something that like should be like considered as a positive thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think like in I guess I'll speak to like on a local level, like here like in America, like I think from there just like needs to be like more overall knowledge of like what like a scientist or what science is on a day-to-day basis
Mm-hmm.
that like just like doesn't get as much attention,
Mm-hmm.
like I think the idea that like scientists can change their minds based off of new information um um is sort of like weaponized, and it's like, oh, like they have no idea what they're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
like no, it's just like there's new information came in and therefore they've like changed
Okay,
their
but I
like
want to be a little bit
perspective
more
on it.
provocative, because one thing is maybe to write an article about what is science, right? That will be read maybe once, but how can you
Mm-hmm.
convey that in every single piece that you communicate? You know what I mean? How can you do
Mm-hmm.
that? What kind of wording do you use? How do you rephrase things to make that part of it? But to make it more natural to the. I mean, I know you guys you're focusing in most in scientific community, right? So they
Mm-hmm.
understand already. But how do you think you could make it more relevant?
Yeah, I think it takes like science communication and science writing that maybe like looks a little bit towards the context of the past of a particular topic.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you're like covering like
Mm-hmm.
a topic on like immunology,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And
Mm-hmm.
maybe like and if you're talking about like this new study that came out that revealed this new mechanism, spend a little time towards the top saying, hey, in the past, this is what these other scientists thought before,
Mm-hmm.
but like with advancing science, we now know that it wasn't that simple,
Mm-hmm.
and like now we like know more. So I think it does take like conveying to the audience historical context a little bit, that like, hey, these are really important results, and the reason that they're important is because there's like a body of work from the past that this new discovery has like changed,
Mm-hmm.
right? And communicating to like the audience that, hey, like this is part of the process,
Mm-hmm.
so like I think like put like again, it really depends on audiences, right? So like
Yep. Mm-hmm.
in a newspaper article, like for example, like the New York Times, for example, like they would have to add that context for their readers, right? That's something that we don't necessarily have to do. We do in like some context, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like for like the layperson, for like the reader that like is just like a casual like person that is like reading an article because they just like want to know more about science, it's important to give them like historical context about a particular topic.
Yeah, thank you so much for your answer. It's, it's very important what you're describing, and I know you have a few minutes left because you have a very busy schedule, right? So I want to talk about a very hype and oversimplified topic, which is AI, of course, right?
Mhm.
Because now AI can write, so perfectly prose, what seems to be so polished, right? So what changes for your job and for the future now?
Yeah, so it's something that we talk about a lot, and I us and other outlets, and the outlets that will succeed moving forward are the outlets that do the publications, magazines, newspapers that make content that AI can't produce. You know, so AI can explain to you what synaptic plasticity is, and it can like refer to like research, and it can refer to like papers, and sometimes it does it poorly, other times it does it better, and like
Yeah.
sometimes it makes up references,
Oh
but
yeah.
like but you can get from like Claude or ChatGPT or whatever, you can get a simple explainer on what synaptic plasticity is. What these large language models can't do is talk to experts. What these large language models can't do is like interview people and like really like get into the sort of like nitty gritty of like how the science between papers is happening, right? So like these large language models will take like everything that like is like there, like we are talking to the scientists on a day-to-day basis, and like we are further ahead than the large language model because we know that like this like researcher is working on this like really cool project that's going to come out in like 2 months, and we're like working on to like make sure that we like capture what actually produced that science, and like what was behind all these experiments, so um, uh, AI can do like a lot of things and can do a lot of things really well. We always try to make sure that we're doing news stories or we're doing like perspective articles, like our opinion pieces that a large language model can't do. Like a large language model can't produce an opinion from like a famous neuroscientist, which we like have on our site. A large language model can't talk about their favorite paper and can't talk about how that like for this paper changed my life, how like their paper like a paper like influenced like this person. How would it know? Because that's not information that's available, and on the internet, right?
And you,
So yeah.
sorry, yes. I was. What were you wanted to finish? Sorry, I interrupt you.
Yeah, no, that just like the publication. Every single publication is thinking about this, and like every single publication is thinking about like how can we make content that is not reproducible by AI, and that's something that like moving forward you will see more and more of.
Because you said you read a lot of papers, right? So have you noticed because there's danger that people are talking about in the community, right? That the AI is kind of flatten out average in the scientific voice, right? Do you perceive that? How can we make it more unique?
Yeah, I look, I think that that is a concern, the flattening of like the language. I think preserving that is using large language models in a way that is like supportive, but that is not like entirely replacing your work, And I know that is hard because I have talked to even like scientist friends who like say like, hey, English isn't my first language. So like I asked like the ChatGPT or like Claude or whatever to like write this method section for me because it's like easier for me and it saves me so much time, and while I do understand that perspective, I also push back a little bit, saying that there still needs to be a level of like individuality to like how you write a scientific paper. So like I think it's like moving forward, there needs to be a sort of like understanding that this is supposed to be a tool. This is not supposed to fully like replace your work, and you find so much in struggling through the writing process, that like eventually will lead you to like a better understanding of your work than just like letting like a large language model support you. So I think that like it takes folks like not being tempted by the tool, like and using it in like sporadic ways, or hey, or maybe like, hey, I'm really struggling with this section. Could you give me like three options to like rewrite this section? And like that's sort of like, at the very least, like you're still like in the process of like, okay, like which one of these are communicating better? Maybe let me change some words here or there, for this. Like it really needs to be a tool. I like for scientists, not like if you just see it as a thing that is like efficient and just to like improve your efficiency, it's like, oh, like you can just write the paper in like 2 hours and that's better for me. I think it will the scientific voice will continue to be flattened, like you mentioned, like because like it doesn't, these large language models don't have individuality, like and it doesn't matter how sophisticated they'll get. I don't think they'll produce the individuality that just
and they may
a person
become more expensive in the future. It depends on the companies that produce them, or maybe they will not work in the same way. There are so many things happening, right? For example, there are a lot of scientists, right? Science has grown and it grows a lot exponentially. You will say, right? The amount of papers, it's really grown a lot. It's really hard to keep up. AI is coming now, So, do you think the current system will be sustainable, or how you envision, a more healthier culture around all these changes, but while preserving, what is relevant to create a good science?
Yeah, that's really hard because so that's a tough question because so many things need to change, like I think like people need to publish because there's an incentive structure at institutions that like tells you that like if you
Do
don't
we
have
need to
enough
publish?
papers.
That's another question that maybe people are wondering.
Yeah, no, that's a very fair question, like maybe like people like need to publish less, right? Like and like like more like substantial papers with like like less frequency, but like given the academic like structure, like I know like we all know why people are incentivized to publish as much as they can because like that's how like career metrics are defined, right? So I for that I don't have a great answer for you, like I
I
think it
was
really
wondering,
like
maybe you had the solution for
no,
life, like.
no, I do not. I do not because like I think that is something that like it will take a lot to change, like the
Yeah.
incentives of like institutions and like how they attribute merit to their like faculty members, and also like how like the journal process works, like where like journals like need to also like assess like is how journal publishing is currently constructed the best way for science moving forward, like I for that I don't have the answer to those questions.
Oh, oh my God, I just forgot. I mean, because I think we're probably reaching the end of the conversation, but there are some questions from the audience. Do you want
Sure.
to take some of them?
Sure.
Okay. Fear is rarely a good communication state. Might attract attention, but I don't think it's a good communication mode. Yes, I agree with you. Chegos loco foco. Okay. Here's a question: what do you want to accomplish when communicating with any given audience? What are you trying to achieve beyond simply spreading knowledge?
Um, personally, like, and this might be selfish. I just think it's fun. Like I really love science and like in particular like neuroscience, and I think that like yes, it is important to communicate science and to make it more accessible even within the neuroscience community, but like like the public at large, because like before I worked at the transmitter, I worked at places that were more public facing, that were like places like TED Talks and health.com and WebMD. So like I do think that it's important for people to like know this. I also just like it, like I also think it's like a fun job to do to um, put science into a bucket that like is like accessible and like that treats neuroscience with the importance that like music or movies or TV like or TV shows have like I see like I think like scientists like should be celebrities just like celebrities are and like I just like covering like in putting a scientist in a position where like like their work gets like merit like so like it's just like something that I just like really enjoy doing I don't think it needs to be sort of totally like mission driven
And there was a question that is related to something we talked in the past. How do you draw the line between the scientific part and the marketing part, where you need to sell, the story?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's very important. It really comes down to focusing on the like knowing your audience, right? And like knowing what will attract the audience in a way that is not like predatory, like so we like think a lot about like headlines and like how like to make a headline that is like interesting but it's not like neuroscientist solves Alzheimer's, you'll never see like a headline like that in our magazine
Oh yeah,
because
and
that's
some
simply
others,
not
yes.
true. Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's simply just not true, right? So like it is something that like we like think about, like how like to balance those two things, but it is knowing your audience because we know that our audience won't click on a headline that says that Alzheimer's has been solved, like that's not going to work for us, and that's not the type of audience that like will like attract to our publication.
I think within the chat that I see, like the question of fear, and marketing and stuff was very, very popular. And I'm so sorry for it because I didn't realize the questions were there. So I don't know
It's okay.
how much time do you have left?
Maybe like 5 minutes.
Okay, so yeah, because I mean, I'm pretty sure this person is actually on the field because it's give a very scientifically looking text from what I can see, because I think he was like fears-based news. It's probably grabs attention, but it's not effective, right? Because it
Yes.
doesn't lead to good debates. And apparently, there's an argument for effective communication, be done by only in a regulated nervous system, I guess like a peaceful brain in a way, right? Your prefrontal is active and can assess without limbic hijack. Okay, can you reply to that because I'm not in the field.
No, not really. Fear conditioning and like fear neuroscience is
Yeah.
not an area
Okay.
that I know
Okay.
that well, so not really. But like given enough time, I can like look up stuff to answer that question maybe at a later time. But
Yeah,
I
because like
not.
from common sense, I can just imagine when you react through fear, you're actually not completely rational, right? In like a from like a common sense way, right? So you don't have time to really, ponder different weights of all different aspects. I reach a more, evidence-based conclusion, right? Yeah.
True. Yeah, but like I said, like we have like our like separate like expertise and like fear mechanisms and circuits. That's not my
Yeah,
area of
honestly, I
neuroscience.
found it fascinating. The marketing, communicating, is one aspect of reaching out,
Yeah.
and I think I'm. I mean, that's why I'm here talking with you because I really like
Yeah.
many aspects of life, and I think it's journalism is something I never talked so long with somebody in the field. So I found
Yeah.
it really interesting because it's a really good bridge, So as we as scientists do, and how do we, um, make sense to what we have? Because if we don't talk what we do, then it doesn't exist, right? It just only stays in a very small bubble. So if you want to leave like maybe one last message, from your perspective as a scientist, as a journalist, for the rest of the audience, either scientists of the general audience, or just people motivated to listen to this, what would be, how can you motivate them?
Yeah, well, so I would say something that you guys are doing very well here is like be as interdisciplinary as possible, right? Like I think what I would communicate to
Maybe we're biased, honestly.
and of course, but what I could communicate to other scientists is that you'll never know what you'll learn by like exposing yourself to like other aspects of science, you know. And like for example, like I can tell you from my aspect of like neuroscience, like I'm very grateful that I go to like so many like different talks and like learn about so many different aspects of neuroscience because it gives me like a larger grasp on the field. I would just like say like that as in a wider sense to like science overall. Like if you're like a physicist, you know, go to the microbiology talk that you know is in like you know the next department. You know, like you never know like how you'll like
If they
what
have the
else like you'll
time.
learn. Yeah, exactly. If you have the time, obviously. But yeah, like being interdisciplinary is like a really like valuable thing that like we as scientists like are very like lucky to do.
Yeah, I think you are very lucky, and I really want to thank you and like, everybody listening or in the future watching this video. I'm very glad that we have you here today in this SEMFiloquia. um, I hope everybody enjoyed the discussion, and yeah, of course, like I hope people keep connected like you are, you know, in the many topics of science, culture, you know, especially interdisciplinary thought. I think it's, as you said, extremely relevant in today's world. Yeah, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so
Yeah.
much. This was so fun. Thanks, Sofia.
No, thanks to you, Francisco, and thanks to everybody. Yeah, have fun. Enjoy your brain.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.